It is exactly 4 p.m. on Independence Day. Very good evening and welcome to this particular talk show. I'm Arnold Sagawa. As we unpack the role of human rights in the electoral process, as we do gear up for the 2021 general election, the role of bodies such as the Uganda Human Rights Commission can't be overemphasized. As a constitutional body established to actually protect and promote human rights in Uganda, the Human Rights Commission is obliged to ensure that there is observance of human rights even during the electoral process. Today, we delve into this particular conversation, and I'm joined by a very, very esteemed panel to unpack this particular conversation. To my left, we do have Dr. Katebarirwa Amoti, who is the acting chairperson of the Uganda Human Rights Commission. And to my extreme left, we have Mr. Bionabie Kamadi, who is the Director of Research and Education and Documentation at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Gentlemen, many thanks for making time to speak to us.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with, I think, the beginning. With you, Doctor. How essential is it for us to appreciate human rights in developing countries, such as Uganda, when it comes to an electoral process?
Well, first of all, before I discuss that, I would like to, with your permission, to congratulate His Excellency the President of Uganda and the entire government of Uganda, and indeed the people of Uganda, for the successful journey we have traveled to reach to this day when we are celebrating the 58th anniversary of our independence. I would immediately want to request everybody in this country to realize the importance of this particular celebration of the 58th anniversary, because it is taking place at the time when we are in the midst of the general elections. This celebration should remind us of the journey we undertook when we got independence in 1962. It's not yet complete. We must consolidate what we have achieved, but we must accomplish what we haven't yet achieved. To come to your question, why is it human rights so important in our societies? And I will discuss that also and connect it to the current process of elections. It's very important that we realize that human rights, or every human being is born with human rights. And the human rights are not given to any individual by anybody, not even government. They are inherent in our lives when we were born with them, and therefore wherever we are, they must be respected if we are to live as human beings in dignity. So whether we are Africans or there are other people who are in Asia or in Europe or whoever, it's very important to observe and protect human rights, because this is what determines the dignity of a human being. So in the African countries, and particularly in Uganda, to come back home, human rights is observance and protection and promotion of human rights is very important, and because if we are to live in dignity, and if we are to also achieve the goals of our independence, which we are celebrating today, it's very important to protect, to promote, and observe human rights. And now we are in the process of elections. It's very important that the electoral process throughout, whatever is done in line with the spirit of protection and promotion of human rights. That is only when the elections will be successful and have meaning.
Let me bring you in, Mr. Kamadi, because we are going to have an election in with an unprecedented pandemic of our generation, arguably also for the past 100 years. And I think the first question before we delved into the human rights vis-a-vis elections should have actually been appreciating what human rights are and segueing that into the pandemic and some of the SOPs and some of the new standard procedures that have been put forth. Give me an appreciation of where we find ourselves on one side, trying to make sure that the virus is that, well, we observe what the Ministry of Health says, and on the other side, not demeaning the human rights as they stand. How do we appreciate those two?
Thank you very much. Human rights is a cross-cutting issue. Actually, when you say before we even delve into human rights, we should have talked about the pandemic. The pandemic itself is a human rights issue. So you cannot disassociate COVID-19 from human rights. They are inseparable. Because actually COVID-19 affects the whole spectrum of human rights. We should not be focusing only on the right to health. The lockdown until recently was total, and up to now some sections are yet to be late to operate. Therefore, the pandemic has affected political, economic, social, cultural, and every aspect of our lives. Now, specifically when it comes to the human rights and elections, I think the most important thing that we should appreciate as a country is that human rights should be respected throughout the electoral process, but all actors should be quick to appreciate that not all human rights are absolute. The right to vote provided for under Article 59 of the Constitution is not an absolute right in our Constitution, much as it is very, very important. We have Article 23 of the Constitution that provides for the right to personal liberty.
If I could just pause you there, what would you define as absolute for someone who is not very cognizant of legal jargon?
Okay, absolute rights are stipulated under Article 44 of the Constitution, and they include freedom from torture. Now that means that right must be enjoyed at all times, and very critical in the electoral processes we are talking about, as we shall be discussing later. Freedom from torture, cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. It's a mouthful, but most importantly, we usually know torture, but there is also inhuman and degrading treatment. We have the right to a fair hearing, is one of the absolute rights under Article 44 of the Constitution. Freedom from slavery and servitude, and also the right to an order of habeas corpus, producing somebody in court dead or alive in case of where we have incommunicado detention and you do not know where one's relative is. So those are the absolute rights. But in the context of the elections, therefore in our Constitution, it is only those rights provided for under Article 44 that are absolute in nature. Now, all other rights can be limited, and the limitations are provided for under Article 43 for purposes of public order, public health, public security, public morality. And in this case, in the context of the pandemic, it is for purposes of public health. So in order to enjoy Article 59, right to vote, and maybe Article 1, exercising the people exercising their will on who should govern them through regular, free, and fair elections, it should also be read together with Article 38, where every individual is free to participate in the affairs of government, either individually or through his or her representatives. So all actors in the political process should appreciate that the right to vote should be looked at in line with other constitutional provisions under Article 23 and the most important Article 43. and cooperate with the Electoral Commission, Uganda Human Rights Commission, and other actors, generally Ministry of Health, to ensure that in exercising the right to vote, we should not prejudice other rights as it is stipulated under Article 43 of our Constitution.
Fascinating.
I think also what is important to stress here in terms of relating human rights and the current situation of COVID-19 is that really COVID-19 is affecting a very important right, that is the right to life. So it's very important in whatever we do, whatever we aspire to achieve in terms of enjoying our own rights. It's very important that we know that this menace of COVID-19 is affecting a very important right, that is the right to life. And therefore we must cooperate. As Kamad has said, we must cooperate with the Ministry of Health, we must cooperate with the police, we must cooperate with all the security agencies, we must respect and follow the directives from the President, the guidelines from the Ministry of Health, so that as we enjoy other rights, including the rights we should enjoy during the elections, we know a very important right is being affected by COVID-19.
It's very. I want us to move on to the election process and human rights. That very, very important. Well, the primary focus of this particular discussion. But you're raising some very interesting points, and as someone who's not a legal scholar myself, you're very drawn back when you hear there were reports in Southern Africa very recently during the lockdown of some legal practitioners actually dragging the governments to court over the lockdowns. Now, it leaves a very, very wanting picture, given the fact that, well, the government is on one hand trying to make sure that the virus doesn't blow up out of control, and on the other hand, someone has a legal premise that is, you're taking away our right to maybe association and all that, which for me, maybe Kamadi, you could touch this very, very briefly before we get back to the elections. Where does the human rights bodies, let's say the human rights commissions of sorts, where do you then draw the line? Because it's very gray here.
It's not gray if everybody cared to appreciate and act objectively. In the enjoyment of human rights are enjoyed in tandem with duties and responsibilities. You can never say, I have a right to anything, and therefore there is no corresponding duty or responsibility. I followed the proceedings you are talking about. I think for us here as a country, I should say, it is important to appreciate that in the enjoyment of human rights, we must always observe our duties and responsibilities as well. So there is no gray area. Like I've just told you, Article 23 provides for the right to personal liberty, but it also provides for when this right can be limited, you know, and one of the provisions is to prevent the spread of an infectious disease.
That's specifically?
Yes, yeah. Specifically under Article 23, to prevent the spread of an infectious disease. And this is COVID we are talking about. So you cannot say, I have my freedom of movement. If Muru and Elegu is under lockdown, you are required under Article 23 not to go there. And like I said earlier on, the limitations must be acceptable in a free and democratic society, and demonstrably justifiable. Therefore, you cannot say I have the right to freedom of movement, I will go there at all costs. You have a duty to protect others. Actually, under Article 17 of our Constitution, where your rights begin is where other people's, where your rights stop is where other people's rights begin. It is a duty of every citizen in Uganda to respect the rights of others. So for if you say, I have my right, freedom of movement, the other peoples have their right to health, they have the right not to catch, to catch the virus from you. Right. So we must understand human rights and put it in perspective.
Interesting.
But the issue of, you referred to South Africa. I was listening to the BBC this morning actually, and they said something like Africa has done very well in terms of limiting the impact of COVID-19. That is now a fact.
Sure.
The danger we are facing is our economies are likely to be affected. That's what they added. But this achievement Africa has done, in spite of the challenges we have as a continent, we are not well off like other continents in Europe, in North America and so on. But to do so well like that, one of the reasons why we have achieved that is that our governments generally, and our government here in Uganda, took steps, some of them drastic, to ensure that the spread of COVID-19 was minimized. And so the lockdowns had good meaning for our people. That's why we have achieved
justifiable.
This. It's justifiable. You know, people should open their eyes and keep their ears open. Facts are on the ground. We know what is happening in Europe, what is happening in North America, what is happening in South America, in Brazil, and so on. We know what is happening there. You hear people talking of, I have my right not to put on a mask. Why do you tell me put on a mask? Surely, if you are going to endanger other people's rights, and it is in your interest of your family, your wife, your children, and so on, that you put on a mask, but for you, you are interested only in your right, this is failing on the duties and responsibilities which our countries, I think, have done well to emphasize through the measures they have taken.
Okay, let's move on. What actually constitutes a free and fair election? I bring this up because we were notified, well, in the wake of the lockdowns and, of course, COVID-19, that we'd be having scientific campaigns. Now, this initially was mistaken by even the media. You would hear so many people saying scientific elections, which was categorically wrong, but scientific campaigns. Now, how has the Human Rights Commission appreciated this? Do you get the sense that the scientific campaigns have been observed? And also, does a scientific campaign leading up to an election defeat the whole rationale of the broad spectrum of rights that you and I are entitled to start with? Let me start with you, Doctor, then I'll hand it over to Mr. Kamadi.
Well, we have already talked about the need for us to appreciate the context in which we are operating, COVID-19. And at the same time, we have to follow the Constitution, and that's why we are having the hybrid scientific election. Well, they are important rights which are being observed. There are others which are being affected to some extent by the measures that have been taken in order to minimize the spread of COVID-19. But on the whole, so far, what has happened is encouraging. For example, one of the rights that should be observed during a process of election like this is the right to associate. People should be free to associate either under political parties or associations or organizations. We have the political parties functioning, in some cases with some difficulties, some of those difficulties actually emanating from the organizational problems that are within those political parties. But on the whole, the political parties, the political organizations are functioning. As we are talking now, we are coming to the end of the party primaries. And in spite of some of the problems we have witnessed recently, particularly during the NRM primaries, but at least generally, people have been able to associate themselves under those organizations. It is very important in an election for people who qualify to vote, people of the age of 18 or above, to be allowed space to register and vote. I think the electoral process, the Electoral Commission has done a good job in terms of registration of voters, cross-checking the registers of the voters. That process also has generally gone on well. It's important also that the voters have access to information that can enable them to know what to do during the process of elections, to know the laws that govern the process of election. That is where we still have some challenges. We come in as a Human Rights Commission because that's where we make some contribution in terms of two processes mainly, I think, and Kamadi will talk about this. We are in charge of the process of civic education in this country, which really to some degree overlaps with what also the Electoral Commission done, voter education. Now, when we don't have enough resources, our hands are tied, we are not able to do enough civic education. And certainly we have done a lot, but we would have wished to do more. The other process is educating the population about the Constitution of Uganda, to know what their obligations are in terms of the Constitution, including what Kamada has talked about, the right to vote, and how is this achieved. Again, that is an area where we come in and we intervene, and we've done a lot through our regional offices and field offices, but resources also limit us. But generally, you've seen the enthusiasm that was witnessed during the NRM party primaries, in spite of the challenges that were there. But certainly, the mass turn-up of the people during those elections is an indication that people are at a reasonable level of awareness of their rights in terms of democracy, in terms of elections, and their obligations. We need now to deal with the challenges, but nevertheless, the level of awareness is promising.
Kamadi, I want to throw over to you, and I mean, the doctor has touched on many of the points. Just touch on that, then maybe there was an issue where some opposition parties, well, with the scientific campaigns, some opposition parties brought to light that some of the media outlets are state-owned, and well, the others that are private are actually falling onto the other side, which is well, to the ruling party, the appropriators. What has been your view vis-a-vis constitution of a free and fair election? Just touch on that.
Thank you very much. A free and fair election should reflect the will of the people. That is the most important thing. And it should be transparent, all-inclusive. There is free expression, so that when someone is defeated, he or she accepts and say, yes, the ground was leveled, I was defeated. Now, the moment the tenets of free will are not there, then there is a problem. It ceases to be free and fair, implying whoever is participating in this election should be given enough space, equal space, so that the outcome is not contested on account of I was sidelined, I was disadvantaged. you've touched on the aspect of accessing media. The law as it is now provides for equal access to state media.
Kamadi, if I could just...
let me finalize this.
There was a gentleman, you've touched on something that's very fascinating. There was a gentleman who was apparently locked out of contesting for the top job in one of the parties. I don't know what you make of that. Would that actually... these are, of course, reports. During one of the primaries, he wanted to run for the presidency, and he was locked out, apparently. That's what he says. He's on record saying that.
That would certainly affect what we call a free and fair elections. And what I should also point out, under Article 71 of the Constitution, it provides for multipartyism. But one of the provisions there is to the effect that in the political parties should exhibit internal democracy in line with the democratic principles enshrined in the Constitution. So whether you are NOP, you are NRM, you are FDC, whatever you do within your internal political party activities should be in line with the democratic principles enshrined in the Constitution. So at no point should any candidate be disadvantaged, whether it is an internal political party election or a general election. So going back to a free and fair election, the aspect of the media you touched on, the provisions right now are talk of equal access to state-owned media.
Right.
Now, if any TV is not state-owned media, what should happen? Now, this is where we are calling upon all the actors, the owners of the media, and we are reaching out to the National Association of Broadcasters, as Uganda Human Rights Commission, the Media Council, Uganda Communications Commission, Electoral Commission. It requires a stakeholders engagement and ensure that even if you own a media house privately, you should not disadvantage the others in as far as campaigning is concerned. Because when you do that, if you block your opponent from campaigning on your radio, the outcome will be contested. It will have legitimacy issues. So a free and fair election requires that you don't allow room for people to say, had he allowed him to appear on that talk show, possibly he would have won. Actually, when that is done, it also brings about what we call sympathy votes. It has happened. And you see, you make arrangements, you beat up your contender, and then people say, we shall vote the other one. Now, that is not issue-based. So, transparency, inclusiveness, all help in ensuring that the election is credible and the free will of the people comes out of that election.
Actually, now that issue is very important during this hybrid scientific election, where candidates are not going to have access to the electorate as it used to be. Yes, no. So really I'm adding my voice to what Kamada has said. We are appealing to private owner, the state media. That one is required by law, by the Constitution, to allow equal free access by all the candidates who are standing to inform the voters. But you know, the tendency in the past has been to focus on state media. And yet today, state media is one out of so many media platforms in this country. Actually, the private is dominant, almost overwhelming. So we are appealing to the proprietors, to the journalists in the private media fraternity. Please, it's very important under the present circumstances of an electronic election to allow free, equal opportunities to all the candidates so that they can provide information. They can sell their programs to the electorate so that the electorate, when it comes to voting, they stop voting for 2,000 shillings, because that's what has been happening. You know, you've seen it. People distributing money, and they don't distribute much. 2,000. 2,000 which cannot even buy chicken. But somebody sells his or her vote for 2,000 shillings. But if the people are well informed and they know what their interests are, what their rights are, their interests in terms of development for their own homes, families, for their own local communities, for their country, they will stop being beguiled so easily like that and start voting for substance. So it's very important for private media to assist the people of this country, the voters in this country, to have adequate access to information.
Many thanks for that. Gentlemen, let's take a quick break, but when we return, we'll be delving into some other sticky situations when it comes to this particular role of human rights, let alone the Uganda Human Rights Commission and the election that is just a few months away. Let's take a quick break. We'll return with more on the same.
Every year on the second Saturday during the month,
.24 to 5 p.m. Welcome back. I'm Arnold Sagawa. You're still watching this particular talk show as we delve into human rights, all being cognizant of the upcoming election just a few months away in 2021. Joining me for this particular conversation are two very erudite gentlemen. Just to my left, Dr. Katebarirwa Amoti, who is the acting chairperson, Uganda Human Rights Commission, and to my extreme left, Bionabi Kamadi, who is the Director of Research, Education and Documentation at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Gentlemen, welcome back. Let's just set off where we left off. The role of the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Let me start with you, Doctor. Uganda Human Rights Commission, usually well, as the name suggests, very old institution, has been around for such a long time. But when it comes to this particular time, at this particular corner, how would you explain it to an ordinary citizen? Where do you come into this particular picture? Yeah,
that's an important question. I remind you that Uganda Human Rights Commission is a constitutional body. It was set up under the Constitution, Article 51. Really meaning that it was set up by the people of Uganda through their representatives who made the Constitution. And the role, the mandate of Uganda Human Rights Commission is to promote and protect human rights in this country. Always, but now, as you've said, during this particular process of election, we tend to focus on the rights of the people, those who stand for elections, candidates, and those who vote. But also other actors in the process. For example, you have got the security forces getting involved, the Electoral Commission getting involved. The other day we had a meeting with the Electoral Commission, the chairperson and the commissioners. He raised a very interesting issue. He said, for us here, the staff of the Electoral Commission, we don't vote on that day. We are overwhelmed by work. Yet, they also have a right to vote. So our role as Uganda Human Rights Commission is to make sure that rights and freedoms and liberties are respected and promoted during the process of election. And how do we do this? One of the things that we do is monitoring the process of election. The previous election of 2016, we deployed over 200 of our staff across the whole country. I think we were the biggest monitors in that exercise. So we monitor the process of election right from the time when the Electoral Commission begins its work of drawing up the roadmap, of and publicizing the roadmap, now revising the roadmap. Then you have now the process of registration and displaying the registers, and voters checking the registers. Then you get into primaries, party primaries, and so on and so forth, right up to the end, including after the results of the general election have been announced. We continue the process of monitoring. That is one of the things we do. But as I have already indicated earlier on, we also have the mandate of educating the people through civic education, and this takes place before the electoral process takes place, but also during the electoral process. And I've also talked about educating people about the Constitution and their responsibilities and duties as far as the Constitution is concerned. That also continues during the process of election. We also have, when we are monitoring, it's very important for us to focus on how the government of Uganda is honoring its international and regional obligations, because the government of Uganda has signed a number of international human rights yes, not only international but regional at the African level, even regional at the East African regional level. So we monitor how the standards stated in those documents are complied with, particularly by government and its institutions. We also have another important role that we play. We receive complaints on alleged human rights violations. That is also part of our mandate, the Constitution. We receive them, we investigate them thoroughly, and after investigations, we decide how we should handle them, either through mediation between the parties conflicting, or encouraging the parties to agree to settle their differences amicably, or we have a tribunal which has the powers of court. So where it is necessary, those complaints are taken to the tribunal, which then will listen to both sides, the complaining side, the responding side, and then it will take decisions and for the purpose of remedy. So we have that duty also, we come in. And during the election, you have a lot of complaints of human rights violations which come to our commission through our regional offices and our field offices. Yeah.
It's, I think, because we happen to be in a newsroom, I'm speaking for myself here and my colleagues, all this news comes to you on a daily. And I've just remembered when a doctor was speaking, an issue around one legal practitioner mentioning that if we were to have this hybrid election, which is premised on a scientific campaign, then there would be need to have an amendment or a provision in the Constitution. I'm remembering this because it's not very often that I sit down with two legal scholars. I think, Kamadi, you could touch that for me, whether or not for this to actually work out and have a credible election, at least as seen across the world in our international partners, would there then need to be a little provision that is added to the Constitution for this to go forward, or it's not necessary? Then segue that for me into the role of citizens in the electoral process, besides voting, of course.
Thank you very much. What I have noticed that elections as a subject is an emotive matter. Therefore, it requires a lot of soberness It requires people to be informed, and you just don't approach an issue for the sake of it. It doesn't call for the amendment of the Constitution to organize this election, not at all. I think I would like to urge all actors in the political processes, in the general elections, first of all, to acquaint themselves with the provisions of the Constitution and the enabling laws, Presidential Elections Act, the Electoral Commission Act, the Parliamentary Elections Act. For instance, the other day, I was seeing some people, with due respect, you would expect to know better, blaming the Electoral Commission for not stating the polling day. Yet the both Presidential and Parliamentary Elections Act are very clear. Polling day is gazetted after nominations. Now, if the EC has not yet nominated members of Parliament and presidential candidates, why do you blame it for not telling you when polling day is?
Komadi, us as journalists, we ought to report what these players say. So please, we try to be sober. I
think it's important to contextualize the discussion. And because when we simply say things for the sake of saying them, we misinform, we mislead, and this is sometimes the cause of violence. Some group of people will say the Electoral Commission is hiding something. Yet the electoral laws are very clear. You cannot set a polling day before nomination. Yeah. So similarly, this so-called hybrid election, nobody invited Corona in the world. If it was only in Uganda, but still, even if sometimes we have had our own challenges here of Ebola and cholera, and we understand. So if it is a disease, it's a disease. The most important thing is for the players to ensure that there is equal space, because COVID is not affecting one candidate and sparing another. So the moment the ground is leveled, let us all participate in the prevailing circumstances, and then whatever we come out with is that. Yeah. So the role of citizens, very, very important. You see, in the protection of human rights, we have what we call the duty bearers and the rights holders. Yes, it is the primary responsibility of the state to protect and promote human rights. But the state is you and me. You know, we are the people. Therefore, we should not all the time heap blame, expectations on the state, the Electoral Commission, the police, government, and etc. We as citizens, we have a role. For instance, let us use the just concluded NRM primaries as a case in point. The Electoral Commission is on record, Ministry of Health is on record, even the Secretary General of the NRM is on record saying observe SOPs. Maintain social distance, wash your hands, wear masks. But what do we see? You see people running in groups in total disregard of this important message. Now, what is the role of you flouting the SOPs and you contract COVID because you are happy and running up and down to vote somebody whose services you are not going to enjoy. So I want to urge Ugandans that Article 17 of the Constitution is very clear on the duties of the citizen. Their duties are very many. I cannot mention them here. But one of them, which is very critical in electoral processes, is cooperating with law enforcement agencies, because there is a lot of fighting between citizens and the police. Sometimes it is the police that tends to flout some procedures, but sometimes it is the citizens. Because why should you pelt the police with stones? they have a duty to protect life and property. So as a citizen, if you are dissatisfied with what is happening, there are recourse mechanisms through a civil way. Petition courts of law instead of fighting with the police on in the field. This is a very big problem that Ugandans need to consider, and even the political actors to help out, because the election is not conducting an election is not a mandate of the Electoral Commission, is not a role of the Electoral Commission alone. They are actors, other actors. The media should also work towards ensuring that we avoid violence and chaotic scenes. So citizens have a duty to respect, to cooperate with the police during law enforcement. Very, very important. But also, the citizens also have a duty, for instance, to register. We are talking at a time when the cut-off point is over by the Electoral Commission, but it is important for citizens to know, because we are going to see complaints of people saying, my name is not in the voters register. But did you register? Your name does not find itself there if you skipped an important electoral registration process. We've just seen one of the candidates for the mayoral race here in Kampala being turned away by the Electoral Commission. And now that is an aspiring leader. Is not on the National Voters Register. Yeah. There are quite many who turn up on polling day and then they try to cause commotion and confusion. So citizens should know that if you did not bother, or for one reason or the other you were unable to register, wait for the next election, because preferential treatment is not going to be given because there was a cutoff. So it is important to know that you have a duty to register for elections and other lawful purposes, like the national voter registration exercises. So citizens should know that they are not supposed to be compelled. They are supposed to participate in these exercises. Very, very important.
I think the issue of violence is very important for us to stress. That citizens, the voters, know they have a duty to prevent violence during the process of the electoral process. We should have a peaceful, fair, and credible electoral process throughout, from party primaries through the general election next year. It's very important also the citizens to know they have a duty and responsibility to avoid bribery during this process of election. You know, commercialization of the election exercise now. People should know that they have a duty and responsibility to avoid using hate speech, language that hurts the rights of other people.
I hear you there, Doctor, but my problem is at times, even the electorate, I'm trying to think on their side, or I'm also part of it, the leaders themselves set such a terrible example. I mean, the other day we saw one, a particular state minister, caught on camera, allegedly pulling a gun from someone and making all these threats. And that for me leaves such, if you are a leader, quote unquote, and he's also a legal practitioner, it just leaves me baffled and at an utter loss for words, and it leaves someone wondering if the so-called leader can do that. You know, what kind of example are you setting for an 18-year-old who is going to go to the ballot box for the first time?
I will not discuss specifically that issue of the leader whom you have quoted, because the matter is in court. As far as our commission is concerned, even me as an individual, when a matter is in court, it is sub judice to discuss it.
Okay.
But let us talk generally what you have said, because you are right. Political leaders, party political leaders should set the right example to the citizens, to the electorate, to behave in a manner that is responsible, respectful of other people's rights, and carrying out their personal, their individual duties to the Constitution. They should set the right example. But many times we are getting, across the political parties, bad examples being set by the leaders. I agree with you.
Definitely. Gentlemen, we're actually running out of time. Very briefly, maybe the two of you could touch on the issues of the common human rights violations. Very interesting impersonation coming up very often, multiple voting. Maybe in just a minute with the two of you, because we're actually running out of time. I'll start with you, Mr. Kamadi.
Thank you very much. In all these electoral processes, a number of human rights violations do occur. One of them is torture. A number of both voters and contestants alike, they end up being tortured. So the message you would like to send across is an election should not be looked at as a matter of life and death. Certainly there will be a winner. With our winner take it all, there must be a winner. So let us avoid aspects that lead to torture. And
cruel
and inhuman, all those things. Yeah. And the police here should also take note, because they are also very much involved in this in terms of the complaints we get. Personal liberty. There are some candidates who are arrested and detained illegally for a number of days. Sometimes...
Plus the 48 hours.
Yes. Sometimes there are funny aspects involving some invisible hands so as to disadvantage another candidate. By the time he or she is released, he has lost enough time to campaign, or should waste a lot of time by frequenting court. That affects the free will of the people. It affects the freeness and fairness of the election. So personal liberty is also highly violated during electoral process. But also right to life. Some people are actually arbitrarily shot, you know, and they die there and then because of an election. There are issues to do with freedom of expression, because the right to vote cannot be achieved without the other facilitating rights. Freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of association. All those are rights that find themselves violated during electoral processes.
Right.
I think it's also important to add that all the people of 18 years or above who have registered to vote should be enabled to vote. And this includes, there should be no discrimination at all of any kind, including discrimination against people categories of people who tend to be vulnerable: women, people with disabilities, minorities, and so on. Everybody of 18 years and above who has registered, everything possible should be done to enable them to vote.
Doctor, definitely with that final word, many thanks indeed. I'm afraid that's all the time that we did have. Lots to actually delve into, but the conversation will be continuing on this particular theme, of course, in concert with the Uganda Human Rights Commission. Many thanks to the panelists today. To my left, Dr. Katebarirwa Amoti, who is the acting chairperson, Uganda Human Rights Commission, and to my extreme left, Mr. Bionabye Kamadi, who is the Director, Research, Education and Documentation at the Uganda Human Rights Commission. That's where we'll leave it for this particular edition. We will be back on Monday with yet another theme on the same. Lots of legal jargon. You need to definitely get out your constitution on that particular day. That sums it up for today. I'm Arnold Sagawa. Thanks for watching.